Kim kicks back in his massive palace, having a leisurely Sunday, drinking and munching on a plate of fine Swiss cheese. He's visited a number of military production facilities earlier in the week, so he's earned himself some rest and relaxation, watching some Jackie Chan movies while he waits for the next VOD of that Chicago Bulls game he's been looking forward to. It's a beautiful day in the DPRK, and despite it being his day off, Kim has kindly allowed us to document a day in his extraordinary life. Here we have it, folks. A look behind the curtain at the hermit kingdom of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and its supreme leader, the one and only Kim Jong-un. Thank you for joining us today, O glorious leader. We will see the opulence and luxury that only a royal like Kim could afford. The ruler of North Korea has some pretty expensive tastes, not unlike his father. While it's not quite known precisely how much cash the big cheese of the DPRK has on hand, he has certainly got enough to splash out on luxury goods. In 2012, the year Kim Jong-un assumed power as the supreme leader, the annual spending on luxury goods leaped from the equivalent of $300 million to over $645 million. Talk about being a baller, right? Hey, keep the cameras over here, folks, just like we practiced. Keep all eyes on the supreme leader only if you want to keep your freedom. Did I say keep your freedom? You just imagined that. Moving on, from a massive presidential palace in Pyongyang to private islands, a luxury super yacht, sports cars gifted by Vladimir Putin himself, and of course a private jet, Kim Jong-un's got it all. Although he has 17 palaces to choose from and his own private island, Kim frequently resides at his Rongsong residence, a fully furnished palace with a 1,000-seat capacity movie theater on site, perfect for kicking back at the end of a hard day. You're probably wondering what movies North Korea's supreme leader likes to watch. Well, Kim Jong-un is reportedly a big fan of the Godzilla movies. Isn't that just wild? This appreciation for kaiju cinema runs in the family. His father, Kim Jong-il, was such a lover of Godzilla that he kidnapped the legendary South Korean film director Shin Sang-ok and his wife, and then forced them to help him make the greatest North Korean kaiju movie of all time, 1985's Pulgasari. Yes, that is actually true. The Kim family really goes the extra mile to keep their people happy and entertained. Hold on, what are you saying? Massive wealth disparity between the elites class and the citizens of North Korea? You better watch your mouth behind that camera. Just keep looking at all the cool things Kim Jong-un owns. The supreme leader's expensive tastes even extend to his diet, with plenty of pricey food imported to the DPRK from all around the world. We're talking about the highest quality pork from Denmark, steaks of Kobe beef from Japan, Chinese melon, caviar from Iran, and even a ton of Brazilian coffee. The supreme leader needs all the caffeine he can get, and only the very best will suffice. He spent well over $920,000 on coffee alone in 2016. Add to that a further $95,000 on German wine, and even $33,000 on pricey American spirits like Hennessy, which can run up to over $2,000 for the top-shelf bottles. Now that sure sounds like a party. What do you mean by what do the rest of the people in North Korea eat? Well, they get their rations, which have been short lately. Actually, the supreme leader had to slash those back in 2019. There are food shortages, you see. Why doesn't he stop spending so much on expensive food in restaurants for the wealthy elites then? Look, buddy, maybe you should just stop asking questions altogether, okay? You know what? I think we're done here. Let's pack it up. Thanks for your time and… Okay, listen. We all know you know this is all just PR. Kim Jong-un indeed enjoys an opulent life in the lap of luxury, while the ordinary citizens of North Korea struggle to make ends meet. While the wealthier elites enjoy fancy restaurants and all the finer things in life, everyday people in the DPRK are given meager food rations and constantly have to worry about famine and disease, all while also being forced to live under the brutal authoritarian rule of their supreme leader, who imposes frightening limits on their human rights, barring them from moving freely around the country and even preventing them from leaving North Korea altogether. With such an insane degree of poverty and inequality between the social classes, you're probably here searching for the answers to a few big questions. 1. How does Kim Jong-un pull it off? He's constantly portrayed and described as a wild, unpredictable man who could fly off the handle at any moment and launch one or multiple of his nuclear arsenal in a fit of rage. And that leads us to question 2. Just why is it that North Korea is constantly threatening to start a nuclear war? And lately, Kim's threats of nuclear reprisal have felt a little less like empty saber-rattling. He's even labeled the Republic of Korea, the DPRK's U.S. allied neighbor, as the primary enemy of his hermit kingdom. He's even ordered the destruction of a monument to the concept of unification, making it seem that under Kim's rule, the only hope of Korean reunification is Kim unifying it as one massive pile of irradiated ashes. But here's the thing. In a post-nuclear annihilation world, there isn't going to be any Chicago Bulls games or any Wagyu beef or any of Kim's beloved bottles of imported Hennessy. So, what's his endgame here? Surely if Kim Jong-un has managed to accumulate more wealth than the citizens of his entire country will ever see, even a fraction of it, then wouldn't he want to protect that lavish lifestyle of his? Let's start by clarifying. Yes, Kim Jong-un is absolutely a dangerous dictator who, as well as being responsible for brutally abusing the human rights of his own people, poses a genuine threat to the world at large. So for all his bluster, there's a lot of weight behind his numerous warmongering threats, and rightly a cause for concern each time he aggressively orders the DPRK's military to be on standby for nuclear strikes. North Korea is one of the most militarized countries in the entire world, with its military upheld as one of the most important societal institutions for tackling economic and political problems. The outward aggression displayed by Kim Jong-un through his military is additionally backed up by the country's advances in nuclear weapons and missile capabilities. In 2006, 2009, 2013, twice in 2016, and in the following year, 2017, North Korea tested 6 nuclear devices. Back in 2009, when the 6-party nuclear talks held between the United States, North Korea, South Korea, China, Japan, and Russia eventually broke down, North Korea saw to it that the facilities that produced the fissile material used in their nuclear weapons restarted production. According to intelligence gathered by the US, North Korea has even developed a miniaturized nuclear warhead that is small enough to be mounted on long-range ballistic missiles. As of 2023, North Korea intensified its nuclear weapons testing compared to the previous year. In addition to testing ballistic and cruise missiles, they've also conducted trials of hypersonic missiles. These missiles can fly at low altitudes, making them difficult to detect on radar. In April 2023, they even tested the Hwasong-18, which is claimed to be their most potent missile, which utilizes solid fuel, enabling faster launch compared to those powered by liquid fuel. On its initial test flight, the Hwasong reportedly flew 1,000 kilometers, but is said to have a range of around 15 times that. The second test in July 2023 sent another Hwasong missile soaring to over 6,600 kilometers in 74 minutes. Much like earlier iterations of the missile, the Hwasong-18 could easily cover enough distance to reach the continental US. And with meetings between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, there were widespread growing concerns that North Korea would soon be seeking even more advanced weapons technology from Russia. Needless to say, Kim Jong-un has the proverbial nuclear-powered bite to back up his bark. But what's interesting is that he's not actually the mad dog that some people seem to think he is. Although he's definitely eccentric, he's far from an erratic and irrational megalomaniac. As a dictator, he's a lot more shrewd, cunning, and above all, rational regarding his decisions. And this even applies when he's firing off threats of military action. It's all part of solidifying himself as not just a credible threat on the world stage, but as the rightful, powerful, supreme leader of his country. To understand exactly why Kim Jong-un is so quick to make military threats, we need to first hop back in time to when his dad, Kim Jong-il, was running the show. For decades beforehand, North Korea was an isolated country propped up by the Soviet Union to act as a barrier preventing the capitalistic ideals of the Western world from making their way into Northeast Asia. However, when the Soviet Union eventually dissolved, all of the financial backing they provided to North Korea suddenly dried up. Without subsidies, the country fell into an economic catastrophe that was so bad that it claimed the lives of 1/10 of their population, who starved to death thanks to an extreme famine that would become known as the Arduous March, which we honestly think is probably putting it quite lightly. The country was on the brink of collapse during the 90s, not just thanks to the economic situation. The famine had managed to undermine a key part of North Korea's official state ideology at the time, one that placed massive restrictions on the information available to its citizens. North Korea taught its people to believe without question that they lived in a place of freedom and prosperity, and the lack of contrary information entering the country from the outside made it easier to believe this. But then the Arduous March hit, and all of a sudden North Korean citizens were starving, which certainly made it a lot harder to believe the state's propaganda was unquestionably true. As a further result of the ongoing famine, North Korea was forced to ease its border with China so that food could enter the country and be sold on the black markets. And when books and videos from outside North Korea were inevitably smuggled in alongside the food, citizens were offered a glimpse at the outside world beyond the borders. Another way in which the loss of the Soviet Union's support threatened the very existence of North Korea was that the country no longer had a large superpower to protect it from the wider world. The Western influence, especially the reach of the United States across the globe, was seen as a direct threat to Kim Jong-il and his regime, and was even openly hostile toward North Korea. So, to solve these problems that threatened to undermine his rule over the country, Kim Jong-il devised a policy to convince the people living under him that the famine and the economic struggles were all actually for the benefit of North Korea. It was referred to as the Jong-un policy, or military first policy. North Koreans were told that the reason for their ongoing hunger and poverty wasn't because their country wasn't as prosperous as the state's propaganda had told them. Instead, Kim Jong-il claimed the reason he kept his citizens impoverished was that it was necessary to fund North Korea's military to protect them from internal and external threats. The line was that imperialist Americans were on the cusp of invading North Korea and would do unspeakable things if they were able to overwhelm Kim Jong-il's regime. So, the Jong-un policy used the poverty of ordinary North Koreans to rally them behind the regime, rather than making them resent it for letting them starve. The famine was reframed as a necessary loss of life to let the North Korean army keep the Americans from taking over. Of course, to maintain any lie, you need to keep up appearances. And if we're talking a lie on that scale, you have to go pretty big to prevent the seeds of doubt from spreading. What better way to keep people believing in the need for military might than by continually making bold proclamations of war, so that you can be seen by the people boldly lashing out against your enemies? In a sense, a lot of Kim Jong-un's threats of war is a trick he learned from his old dad as a way of putting on a show for the North Korean people, as much as a way for him to keep the rest of the world on edge. Threats like that keep one of the country's biggest lies going, the idea that they're constantly on the verge of all-out war with America and need all the military power and nuclear weapons they can get their hands on. Speaking of nuclear weapons, that's part of the reason for the various nuclear tests North Korea has conducted over the years. That was primarily how Kim Jong-il kept the policy of Jong-un fresh in everyone's mind. It's a family tradition that his son has kept on going. Of course, it's far from the only reason for North Korea's ongoing nuclear testing. Jong-un and portraying the country as biting back against their enemies is only one part of why Kim Jong-un is always threatening war. Another reason is that it's a way to push back against the sanctions placed on them by other countries. Naturally, other countries aren't just watching North Korea and hoping that their threats of war are just for show. In fact, the United Nations has historically actively tried to push back against all those worrying missile tests. Of course, when faced with sanctions from the UN, Kim Jong-un often responds with more provocations, like preparing his troops for nuclear attacks. But that's not because he desires to go to war with his enemies. For one, wars are expensive, which means waving off his luxury lifestyle and focusing all his efforts on commanding his forces. However, if a war actually breaks out, Kim Jong-un knows he might not stand much of a chance of winning. Despite being such a heavily militarized country, Kim Jong-un is well aware of how his soldiers, their weapons, and their training compare to that of other armies around the world. Of course he's aware of it. It's how he's able to use that same fear-mongering that his dad did to keep the Jong-un policy alive. So why all the bluster and provocation of war if he doesn't think he can win? Well, it makes it seem like there's a risk of war. Much like a child throwing a temper tantrum, the shouting and over-the-top declarations made by the DPRK's supreme leader aren't an indicator that those end times are upon us, but more that he wants to get his way and then acts out when he doesn't. This creates a pretty big problem, though, whether intentional or not. The problem isn't that North Korea is likely to unintentionally kick off a nuclear war, but that these outbursts could raise the risk of an unwanted conflict. No matter how many of them are empty, a threat on this scale is still a threat and a major cause for concern. For example, when North Korea conducts missile tests, nobody expects South Korea to be in imminent danger, but it still raises a lot of worried eyebrows. And Kim Jong-un is fully aware of how sensitive to this potential danger his enemies are. In order to keep him appeased, South Korea and the US have offered concessions to North Korea in the past as a way to prevent these provocations from escalating into a full-blown conflict. It's done in an effort to quell future outbursts, but oddly incentivizes Kim Jong-un to keep occasionally poking the bear to see what kind of reaction he can get and if it'll provide him with a favorable outcome. As recently as 2024, Kim Jong-un declared that North Korea had no intentions of avoiding war with South Korea and considered them to be his country's principal enemy. He also told his people that they should prepare for a war with the United States But a lot of this comes down to him wanting to apply pressure to the alliance between South Korea and the US, in the hopes that he could eventually undermine it. His actions are purely born of trying to keep himself in power and keep his regime alive by diverting the attention of the North Korean people toward countries he's identified as hostile enemies and away from the many failings of the regime, so that he can seem like a powerful and successful leader, without actually addressing the many issues faced by the people living under his regime, such as the disparity of wealth and the violations of human rights he's subjected his citizens to. It's not hard to see just how threatened Kim Jong-un feels his position of supreme leader is, since it's even a crime in North Korea to speak in any negative way about the regime, the government, Kim himself, or his family. And not the kind of crime that earns you a slap on the wrist and a harsh warning. It's the kind of crime that's punished by death. It's not just his citizens that Kim Jong-un wants to take him seriously either, as provocations also play well among the high-ranking military officials and the politicians of North Korea's wealthy elites, who have also greatly benefited from the regime. These people have considerably more experience than him, some of whom even served under his father, Kim Jong-il, before he died. So how do you keep everyone in line and ensure none of your generals launch a coup against you? You make yourself look like you're just as tough as dear old dad. It's like a North Korean version of Succession if all the Roy children also had access to the nuclear codes, which might give you an idea of just how dangerous this situation is. To his credit, Kim Jong-un didn't waste any time establishing himself as the big dog when he first assumed power. When taking over from Kim Jong-il early in 2012, he enacted one of the most violent political purges in North Korea's history. A number of high-level officials were executed under the guise of treacherous actions, but more likely because Kim Jong-un didn't want any of them undermining him. He even went as far as to have one killed with an anti-aircraft gun. Clearing out the house is one good way to establish yourself as the toughest guy in the yard. The second is to keep people thinking exactly that, and that's where his various aggressive military provocations come in. Developing and testing nuclear weapons sends a pretty clear message to Kim Jong-un's highest-ranking generals and officials. The supreme leader means business. Threatening other countries? Well, he's got to be hardcore if he's going to do that, right? Playing into the internal politics of North Korea itself, Kim Jong-un uses his loud, bold declarations in the direction of war to prove to those around him that he's a capable leader, rallying not just the citizens of the DPRK, but its higher-ranking officials around him, further encouraging them to back him no matter what, and also because he'd have them and their families killed or sent to a forced labor camp for daring to defy or so much as even question his reckless actions. However, while trying to appeal to the rest of North Korea's wealthy elites with his war provocations, Kim Jong-un has to balance that with not endangering his relations with his allies. Primarily, his two biggest backers are Russia and China. Despite their often oppositional stance against the West, and the United States in particular, neither of these countries is eager for Kim Jong-un to hit the big red button, despite being his allies. China is still one of North Korea's most important international partners, accounting for almost 90% of its foreign trade. While China clearly has expansionist plans for Asia, with Taiwan being first on the menu whenever Beijing sees fit to strike, the CCP has no interest in ruling over a pile of irradiated rubble. The result is Kim speaking out of both sides of his mouth, simultaneously playing the stable economic partner for China while wearing the crown of a mad nuclear-powered king willing to blow it all up before losing power. Astute foreign policy nerds are probably thinking, this is a dangerous gamble. Kim Jong-un is essentially betting the state of the world on maintaining his kingdom and ridiculously lavish lifestyle. And you would be correct. If Kim overplays his hand and ends up needing to put his money where his mouth is, Kim won't be the only one going down. We might all be heading into a fiery radioactive grave with him. With sanctions and harsh rhetoric seeming to do little to dissuade Kim's reckless behavior, it's become an open question among the NATO members and its Indo-Pacific partners as to how the alliance should deal with the escalation. Ri Jong-ho and David Maxwell of the National Interest suggested that physical action needs to be taken to illustrate that nuclear weapons are not a win condition for anyone involved, but especially the DPRK, or the escalations may eventually reach an irrevocable peak. Maxwell and Ho put forward a limited attack similar to the Israeli targeted bombing of Syria in 2007. For those experiencing foggy recollection on that, on March 30, 2007, an intelligence report was published stating, quote, Syria has set up within its territory a nuclear reactor for the production of plutonium through North Korea, which, according to an initial worst-case assessment, is liable to be activated in approximately another year. A concerning development, though one that isn't as advanced as the situation in North Korea right now, given that the DPRK is already confirmed to have functioning nuclear-armed ICBMs. However, given Syria's position as a proxy for Iran in the wider Middle Eastern conflict, also involving Israel and the United States, as well as their assortment of allies and enemies in the region, developing a nuclear reactor, which could have led to the development of nuclear weaponry, was seen as an untenable move, and Israel chose to respond. On September 6th of that same year, Israel dispatched 4 F-16 fighter jets to the heart of Syria to strike at the partially completed Al-Kibar nuclear reactor facility situated near Deir ez-Zor. During this 4-hour operation, the facility was allegedly damaged beyond repair, crippling Syria's developing dreams of nuclearization. Could a similar display of targeted force put a dent in Kim's constant threats of war? Perhaps, but it's a hawkish gamble, with a potential high reward tempered by a catastrophically high risk. To fully understand Kim Jong-un's mindset and willingness to tout his last resort as his first line of action, you also need to understand the historical context of being a dictator. It's a career path that can give you some lavish luxuries while you're alive, but in the end, they rarely go out peacefully. Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator from World War II, was executed by partisans along with his wife after the collapse of his fascist regime, after which their corpses were dragged through the streets. Nicolae Ceausescu ruled Romania with an iron fist from 1965 to 1989, until a revolt saw him and his family put up against a firing wall and summarily executed. Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein was hanged outside Baghdad when he lost his power in 2006, and less than a decade later, Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi was attacked by an angry mob, who brutalized and murdered him on video for the crimes he committed against the Libyan people. And these are just a handful of the dictators who died from the wrath of their own populace after they lost their institutional power. It's a tale as old as time, and stories like these widely contribute to the extreme paranoia of dictators who are still in power. One of Kim's nominal allies, Vladimir Putin, was reportedly haunted by the footage of Gaddafi being killed. He saw a potentially dark future for himself at the hands of the Russian people. Many foreign policy pundits pointed to this moment in 2011 as a point of marked escalation in the Russian leader's distrust of everyone around him. It isn't hard to extrapolate this same feeling to Kim Jong-un. Even in the event of a Korean unification, it seems unlikely that the United States will be eager to just give Kim a second chance after years of humanitarian atrocities and rampant threats of nuclear war. Regime change isn't just a threat to Kim Jong-un's lifestyle, it's a threat to his very life itself. And faced with that existential threat, it makes sense from the perspective of a legendarily selfish dictator to constantly remind the world that he's wearing a nuclear dead man switch. If the Kim dynasty goes down, so does the human race. That's the true purpose of Kim's military posturing. It's also why it's healthy to have some skepticism about the merits of a targeted strike. Syria's Bashar al-Assad is no sweetheart. In fact, he shares Kim's penchant for quelling rebellion with the most brutal means necessary against his own people, including rampant torture and the infamous use of chemical weapons. But he is to some extent a rational actor, and a less self-interested proxy of Iran than the DPRK is to China. But back in 2007, while there was a non-zero chance of military reprisals for the Israeli reactor attack from Syria and Iran, neither were nuclear states. If Kim read a tactical strike like that as a precursor to a wider invasion or more direct attacks against himself, we might all end up getting a first-hand look at how unpleasant it is to be affected by nuclear fallout. Another potential solution posited for this incredibly precarious situation is the use of psychological and information warfare. While we discussed earlier how Kim's threats of war are a way to gain favor with the North Korean elites and his high-ranking military figures, those figures still exist under Kim's thumb and may privately be expressing concern that Kim's nuclear saber-rattling could land them all in the same global apocalypse. But these views would have to be expressed very, very privately. As we mentioned earlier, Kim loves a good political purge. High-ranking party members and even members of his own family are not exempt from brutal assassination or execution when he gets the sense that they're turning against him. If Kim likes you, you can live in the lap of luxury, but really it's a gilded cage. Because as soon as he gets tired of you, you and your entire family are off to be worked to death at a forced labor camp. That likely results in certain resentments that North Korea's enemies are eager to take advantage of. The information war route involves destabilizing the Hermit Kingdom from within using the clever application of knowledge. giving the general populace access to information about and media from the wider world, which may break the cult of personality and carefully curated propaganda that the Kim dynasty has spent decades enforcing. And if you doubt that this would be effective, then it does beg the question of why consuming outside media is liable to get you executed if you're caught. But it may be more effective to turn those psyop tactics to the very elites and high-ranking officials that surround Kim, the people who may slip into the power vacuum he creates upon his deposition or death. Working from within to destabilize the upper echelons of the regime may turn Kim's aggression inwards, at the very least taking some of his focus off threatening nuclear Armageddon for the rest of the world. And in a potential best-case scenario, Kim could potentially be deposed from within and replaced by a figure who is potentially more sympathetic to Western interests, or at the very least is a little less liberal with the terrifying nuke threats. Of course, some voices in the national security space are taking a more moderate approach to the apparent escalations of North Korean activities and rhetoric. Commentator Sidney Seiler from the Center for Strategic and International Studies agrees that the preparation of the North Koreans for war is a key factor in preserving their outward legitimacy. None of the countless threats that have come out since the 1953 armistice have ever actually resulted in actual conflict, suggesting that despite the appearance of escalation, we may just be looking at business as usual here. In his own words, a large reason for that has been the U.S. security commitment to South Korea, the presence of United States forces in South Korea, USFK, to support that commitment, and the role of the United Nations Command, UNC, in maintaining the armistice. Deterrence has worked. There's every reason to believe that is the case today. The line is affirmed by the U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who said that the U.S. and South Korean alliance is one of the most robust, capable, and interoperable alliances on Earth that has deterred greater conflict on the Korean Peninsula for several decades. If necessary, we remain ready to fight tonight. This is a war of words and military posturing, and if we're lucky, it'll remain in the rhetorical arena rather than the nuclear one. Seiler also highlights that many recent points of concern, such as Kim's cooling on the concept of reunification, are not unprecedented moves. Political analysts believe it's part of a broader de-risking strategy that the DPRK has been employing since the Russian invasion of Ukraine put global international relations on a knife edge. The risk here is the negative consequences of interactions with allies, exposure to their influence, and potential intel leakage. As we mentioned earlier when discussing the information war angle, North Korea's status quo is surprisingly delicate, which is why they need to use totalitarian tactics to maintain it. Cultural and even diplomatic exchange might weaken Kim's strongman bargaining position and send the country into unknown waters, waters in which the Kim dynasty could end up drowning if they're not careful. Alliances become severed, embassies are closed, and borders are secured. It's a technique that makes a diplomatic, tactical retreat seem like an act of strength from the DPRK. Data on Kim's wider actions also seem to suggest that the threats of war are just as superficial as they've always been. During the 9th enlarged plenum of the 8th WPK Central Committee and the 19th enlarged meeting of the Political Bureau of the 8th Central Committee of the WPK, both very long-winded names for some important North Korean political meetings, Kim stressed the importance of economic development and the hard times ahead. Investments in economic rejuvenation over pooling all resources for the war machine suggests that going on the offensive isn't a real priority for the DPRK in the immediate future, regardless of what threats are being uttered by North Korean spokespeople. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't take North Korea's military aspirations seriously in a long-term strategic sense. According to a report published by the White House, the DPRK has been, quote, seeking military assistance from Russia, including fighter aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, armored vehicles, ballistic missile production equipment or materials, and other advanced technologies. It goes without saying that Russia's own position as a military power on the world stage has been somewhat diminished by a long series of embarrassments during the war in Ukraine, which has resulted in them cozying up closer to the DPRK and in the process increasing Kim's confidence to act militarily bullish towards South Korea and the US. Why? Because of a theory in political science known as the stability-instability paradox, which dictates in simplified terms that while major wars between two nuclear powers are unlikely, small-scale conflicts become more likely. While nuclear weapons are, for obvious reasons, one of the main points of concern when North Korea is rampantly threatening war, you can't underestimate the destructive power of North Korea's conventional weapons arsenal, which is sure to unleash absolute hell on major population centers like Seoul in South Korea during the opening salvos of a reignited Korean War. Engaging in conventional warfare against the southern neighbors is an increased possibility with extra weapons and artillery from Russia. International relations can scoot forward by inches or advance at breakneck speeds, so any of these situations can change quickly. We can only hope that on the whole, cooler heads prevail and the constant empty threats of war from Pyongyang remain empty for the foreseeable future. Because if they don't, we're all in for a world of trouble. Now check out How Cruel is North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and more life inside North Korea stories. Or watch this instead.